All right, welcome on back to On Texas Football. I'm CJ Vogel, joined by Marcus Myers and Rod Babers, two former Texas Longhorns. We're going to be talking future Texas Longhorns, specifically the edge room and what that means going into the spring, and obviously a way too early look ahead into the 2026 season as well. And anytime we talk about the edge room, well, Colin Simmons comes to mind. But look, I think we all agree, and we were talking about this a little bit beforehand, this is a very deep and talented room. We saw glimpses of that with a number of guys who will be back on campus in 2026 contributing for pressures. The havoc rates are going to continue to increase. But before we get to those guys, we got to talk Colin Simmons, because coming off of a year in which he led the SEC in total sacks, there's no reason to think that he's going to be in contention once again for an All-American roster position and all SEC honors. So, Rod, I'll start with you. What's the expectations? What are kind of the ceilings for Colin Simmons?
Wow. I mean, honestly, there really isn't much a ceiling for Colin Simmons. I think, that's why they wanted to bring in Will Muschamp. I think they want to find new ways to weaponize him, to put him in, advantageous situations. This is a guy that, think about how slow he started the season. Actually started the season pretty slow. Would he have 1.5 sacks in his first 5 games, and then just explodes in the last 8 games for Texas. And so I do think it's important to find or define who the next best pass rusher is opposite Colin Simmons. Right? I think they need to figure out who that is. And I'm not sure right now if we know that. Maybe that's something we figure out on this roster when they do want to do the, kind of that overhang front where they have two edges in a pass rushing situation. Who is that other edge that you trust will be able to, if Colin Simmons, ends up demanding a double team, they get, one-on-one blocking on the opposite side, that they'll be able to take advantage of it. So I think that's going to be important in maximizing Colin Simmons, so teams don't just, devote all their attention and resources to stopping and neutralizing him.
And of course, playing with someone like a Colin Simmons, what can that do for a defense in its entirety? When you see all the attention go towards Colin Simmons, Marcus, how often does that free up then the second level? And also, some of these other edge rushers and interior guys, because of the gravity that has to come with defending him.
Absolutely, man. Like it's very similar to the conversation we have on the offensive side of the ball, and how so much attention is going to be, spun towards Cam Coleman's way, and what that does for the rest of the offense. It's the exact same defensively. I'll tell you one of the moments where I kind of knew we had something. You always do, but like where I felt like, okay, he's really going to take this to the next level is against Florida, when there was those 3 plays in a row where they tried to run it at Colin. And he just it was TFL tackle, right? And I think what that shows you is he doesn't really have too many weaknesses to his game. Granted, you want to make sure you clean up the penalties and stuff. But to your point, CJ, there's not really a way that they can scheme truly to avoid what Colin Simmons can do in a game. So then when you talk about, all right, well, maybe we'll just try and run the ball away from him, or maybe we'll boot, opposite him, then that does give, other defenders that, are getting better matchups. Not getting the guy, the running back coming out to chip, or maybe the tight end staying in late, that gives them an opportunity. So whether that's a Lance Jackson, whether that's a Zena, any number of guys will have, their shot when you get some of those one-on-ones. And honestly, I think I first heard you kind of mention it at one point, Rod. It reminds me a little bit of what Green Bay is getting with one of our guys that, came from Texas, getting to play opposite Micah Parsons, right?
Yeah.
Like it gives you opportunities to get one-on-one with guys that maybe you wouldn't otherwise if you didn't have someone that, had that kind of gravitational pull on the defensive line with you.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, it is. And again, if it wasn't for Byron Murphy, you would have had to go all the way back to Malcolm Brown to be the last, defensive line first-round pick. I think Colin Simmons is going to join his name into that conversation as well. Doubt. But, to the point y'all were both making, and how do you really elevate, this group as a whole to manufacture more havoc plays? It's going to be who's opposite of Colin Simmons. And I think we saw glimpses from a number of guys last year. The guy I want to start with is Lance Jackson, because I think he surprised a lot of folks. He was a guy in the freshman All-American conversation, had a big sack against Mississippi State that basically ended the game in overtime. But Marcus, for Lance Jackson to take the leap into becoming that full-time or at least that starting level guy for Texas? Is there anything specifically you need to see or more of what he was able to do last year that would put him in that conversation?
I think you keep building on what you did, from your first season, right? As a true freshman, a lot of it is like a bunch of stuff is flying at you. Granted, he had the benefit of having an older brother that's played the game, so he's been around it for a while. And I think, is a bit more developed than a number of guys sometimes at that level and at that, kind of stage in their development. But I still think that, there's always more that you can build upon. So whether it's just hand placement, some of his ball get off, that'll be something that he can continue to, build on. And those are, some little things that he can pick up from some of the more senior members of that defensive line, whether it is Colin Simmons or, even a Hero Kanu or, Alex January, like guys that, have been doing it. Like there's just little things. I remember, always watching Tim Crowder working with the younger guys, and he was just really, really good at his technique and hand placement. And so there's always ways you can develop. It'll be another, full off season for him where, his head isn't just fully swimming. He's, a bit immersed in the overall system. He's not just moving into campus, right? Like he's going to get to really build up his body, in these months in time leading up to spring ball. And I think, that's a young man that, I still have a lot of high hopes for. It's like you said, CJ, I mean, it was really impressive to me in a big game like that, overtime on the road for, your true freshman to be the one to close it out. So I think that's got to do loads for his confidence heading into the spring.
Yeah,
go ahead, Rob.
No, I just want to say there's so much to like about Lance Jackson. He's a freakish athlete. This is my thing though. He's not. I don't think I don't know if he's a natural pass rusher, but he's a freaky athlete. So he's got to really kind of figure out is he a speed rusher or are you a power rusher in that regard? Because you can be either. All right, speed rusher or power rusher, and also he's got to add. And Mark was saying he's got to add more. He's got more to his repertoire. Right? Pass rushing moves and figure out how you can be more disruptive because his pressure rate, although like I said, I love him and I think he's great watching him on film, is relatively low. And his havoc rate is relatively low. And what you want for guys off the edge are, I need you to be disruptive and you're creating havoc and you're creating pressure. And I will say that Ethan Burke actually got much better at that. Like that's a great example of, oh no, you can get better at it. You can be a guy that naturally is not necessarily you're a good athlete, which Ethan Burke was, great frame, but he wasn't naturally like disruptive and naturally like havoc wreaking off the edge and creating a lot of pressure. But by the time he left, he did. By the time he left, he was doing that. Same Barron Sorrell. Barron Sorrell's another great example. Barron Sorrell at first, he was not necessarily a guy that was really disruptive. He was great against the run. He was great kind of fundamentally and technically, had great effort, right? Had a good motor. But it's like, man, I need you on an edge. There's a few things I need. I need you to wreak havoc, and I need you to create pressure. And by the time Barron Sorrell left, what was he doing? Creating pressure. Yep. So for Lance Jackson, those are two great examples before him. Or guys, by the time they left Texas, they got where they needed to be. They were able to create pressure off the edge, but they weren't natural pass rushers like a Colin Simmons or anything like that. So I think that's going to be the challenge for Lance Jackson. But overall, athletically in the frame, I mean, he's got all the raw material, so I'm not worried about him lacking something.
Well, Rod, stick on that a little bit because going through some of the numbers beforehand, for both Zena and Lance Jackson in this conversation here, it's about finding who else can play the run consistently. Both sat around about 64% of their snaps, rushing the passer. In comparison, Colin Simmons was around 52 to 53 because, well, he was on the field so often, right? Ethan Burke was around 58 or 59 because, again, more snaps lends you to more of what those responsibilities will mean at the edge position. So for Lance Jackson or even a Zena, and I want to throw him into the conversation next. Is it just as simple as, hey, hold the edge, make plays in the run game that will lend you to see the field more and more in 26?
Yeah, no, that's a great point because they are very similar actually in that regard where their pressure rates are relatively low. Actually, if you look at havoc rate, give Zena props. Zena is probably double the havoc rate of a Lance Jackson, so he's creating a little bit more havoc with the opportunities that he's getting. For both of those guys, like Marcus said, it's about adding more to repertoire and almost defining your identity as a pass rusher. And I like those two guys against the run. Actually, I think they do pretty good against the run. And I think that's where some of these guys start. Is they start off being stout against the run, which is, I do believe, a really good starting place. Colin Simmons was kind of the opposite. Remember, he came in as elite pass rusher. Was like, well, he can rush the passers against anybody in the country, but we were going to see if he can stop the run. And then, like Marcus said, last year he added that to his game. Teams want to run at him. He was like, no, you can't just run at him. He's going to use the same traits that make him a great pass rusher now to disrupt the run game. And so these guys, some of the things that make them good at being able to stop the run and start against the run, they need to develop those same traits and sharpen them as being pass rushers. So I think Zena and Lance Jackson have a very similar path here in figuring out, all right, what your elite traits are. Your speed rusher, you're going to be a power rusher. Like, what's going to be your kind of go-to moves here when you know you're rushing the passer, and how do you best generate havoc and be more disruptive as a player with those few opportunities you're given, because you're not given a ton of those kinds of things. I'm with you. I think, and that's why some guys, they have it naturally. Like, I think Brad Spence, actually, if he is going to be on the end, he's a little bit more naturally disruptive. And he creates a little bit more havoc on his pressure rate. He was over 16% as a pressure rate, but Lance Jackson's around 10%. So is Zena. Well, you got to get those pressure rates up. You got to be above around 15% or higher. Colin Simmons at 18%. Yeah, you need to be. That's where you're going to be if you have to get enough opportunities. We're going to have to be able to know 15% of the time he's going to cash in on it. He's going to be able to pressure the quarterback. So I just think it's a challenge. But those guys are still young. And I remember when I was saying the same things about a young Ethan Burke and the same things about a young Barron Terrell. I literally remember that. And I was like, huh. Then I remember like, oh, look, these guys both figured it out. You need Lance Jackson and Zena to figure it out a little bit sooner.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you said, Rod. And you made a great point about Ethan Burke. And it made me think, like, think about his last 2 seasons. Like, by the end of anytime you needed a big play in like a short yardage situation, it turned into like big game Burke all of a sudden. Like, he's making these TFLs, stops on 4th and 1. And it kind of reminds me of like the Jordan documentary, right? Where he was like, I took that personally. Like, you need Zena, you need Lance, one of them, out of that room, or ideally both, to take it personally that, oh, you're just going to block me with one guy? Oh, okay, let me go to work now. And to your point, Rod, yeah, you nailed it. I was searching for the word repertoire, and it wasn't coming to me. But yeah, he's got to add a couple more things to their toolkit. But, with Zena, that's a different body type as well. And he's a much, longer limbed guy. So you have ability to shed and get guys off you, create, a bit of distance there. And so I think, his development this offseason, it was big being able to retain him, right? There was a thought, for a moment that maybe he would, look somewhere else. And so I think being able to retain that type of body frame, if he can build on that this, offseason, that can springboard him into a great year as well.
Yeah. Speaking of disruption and finding guys that, can get on the field immediately and make an impact behind the line of scrimmage, specifically in the passing game, 2 guys come to mind, and we saw them both sparingly, as true freshmen. I mean, Justice Terry, of course, we talked a little bit about him in the defensive line video, but Smith Orogbo is another one to me.
Yeah.
And I say that because, look, against Michigan, he had 8 pass rushing snaps. He had 2 pressures. His first, second career game, he had a sack and a forced fumble.
Yeah.
Whereas the same kind of story goes for Justice Terry. He's on the field against Texas A&M, gets 3 pressures on the quarterback. One of them ends up in an interception. He plays 6 pass rushing snaps against Vanderbilt, 2 pressures and a hit on the quarterback. Like, that is getting on the field and making the most of your opportunities. So for either of y'all, for those 2 guys and I know that there's probably a lot more expectations with Justice Terry here, but how do you then crack the rotation the same way that we talked about Zena and Lance Jackson when it comes to Justice Terry and Smith Orogbo?
Go ahead, Rod. I got a couple of thoughts swirling around.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, I think I'm glad you brought up Smith Orogbo, because the numbers, like I said, they're very small sample size. Sure. But like I said, I was talking about the pressure rate. Man, that dude's up like close to 17%. I said very small sample size. So I'm just saying he's naturally disruptive. I love his frame too. I was actually close to him like last week. Like, dude's got just huge hands, long wingspan, long arms. Yeah. I mean, that's when you're looking at. You brought that up about Zena. right? You want those guys with long arms, man, create distance between them and the O lineman. And then, I mean, it's such a huge advantage that I think Jerry calls them levers. Those guys have those long levers. But Smith-Roquebo, he's naturally, if you look at his havoc rate is freaky too. Like I said, very small sample size. So he and Justice Terry, I do believe in my heart, and Marcus maybe believe this too. I play with guys, they are naturally disruptive. Some guys just know they're just havoc wreakers. That's just their game is built in them, and whether that be they can have it at DB, it can be a linebacker or on a D line. They're just naturally disruptive players. And I think Smith-Roquebo, I know Justice Terry is, but Smith-Roquebo could also be in that conversation too. So I don't know how much you think about those guys playing. I know Justice Terry is going to play a lot. Smith-Roquebo is a guy I'm not sure how much he's going to play. I'm not sure how much Muschamp likes him, but I can tell you, Justice Terry, that dude, he's going to play, and he probably will play in and tackle. I know Muschamp, you might see him at both.
Yeah, there'll be any number of packages that he can be used in. But to your point on Smith-Roquebo, one of the things I really have liked about what this staff with Leal and Clark have done with these edge rushers is, like, at some point in time they get an opportunity, and they're given the chance to prove what they're able to do, right? And it could be, like you said, very small sample size, but that's got to be big for you to do that in the final game, heading into an offseason where now you have a brand new defensive coordinator, right? So to your point, Rod, there is going to be some, okay, how does he want to deploy them? How does he see them? But you do get a fresh set of eyes to some extent to kind of make a mark. And, kind of to your point, Rod, like I've seen it, where guys they kind of light up, when it's that time for them, because they know by one way or another, they're going to find a way to get after the quarterback. They're going to find a way, to kind of wreak some havoc and force some extra attention to come their way. So if there's an offseason to do it, it's the perfect one when you have a brand new defensive coordinator coming back in. Even with this familiarity of campus and everything, it's still new players for them, right? And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how Smith-Roquebo is able to take his game to the next level. And like I said, when we kind of talked about Justice Terry before, I think he's a tremendous talent. So that's kind of a given to some degree for me. It's just how they choose to deploy him. I'm interested to see, what the other guys behind him do.
Yeah, two closing thoughts here, because look, I think we all agree this edge rushing room is in very healthy hands, right? A lot of healthy depth at the moment. There's also going to be a lot of fun competition when you look into the spring, going against not just a first team All SEC offensive tackle and Trevor Gooseby, but now you add Melvin Siani to the mix as well.
Yep.
What does it look like in the spring for a Lance Jackson, a Zena, a Colton Vosick, who we did not mention, but also some of the younger guys, when they go ones versus twos versus ones, do they look like they're, able to compete with some of these guys who have played multiple years of college football? And additionally, I don't know what the pure number of edge rushers are. We've talked about it. Is it 6? Is it 8? Is it 10? But there is going to be a number of guys like Jamarian Carlton. Where does he start out, right?
Sure.
Richard Wesley joining the fold is going to have really high expectations as well. But do we see a Kosi Okpala or a Rocky Cummings, someone with, to your point, what we talked about with the long levers, someone that could be used as an edge rusher, kind of in the way we saw of a Brad Spence in 2025. So either way, it's going to be a lot of fun. But one thing is for sure, when you're headlined by Colin Simmons, you're going to be in a very solid position moving forward. So, Rod, Marcus, thank you very much for joining me today to talk edge rushers. We'll be back soon when we talk about the linebackers moving forward. But for now, y'all have a good afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the day, and we'll catch y'all next time on Texas Football.
Welcome.